Welcome to Mythmakers. Mythmakers is the podcast for fantasy fans and fantasy creatives, brought to you by the Oxford Centre for Fantasy. My name is Julia Golding. I'm a director of the centre, but I'm also an author. And as we come to the end of our third season of Mythmakers, I thought that one way to celebrate that is to celebrate where we've been so far with all of our podcasts over the last few years. And looking back through our sort of catalogue, we've seen some clear trends as to what are the most popular ones for people to download. So we're going to give you today little excerpts from those, so that if you haven't heard them, you can go back and have a listen. But I hope you enjoy the variety of things we're doing. So first of all, and this was one of my very early recordings, was I did a explanation of the places in and around Oxford which were much less well known, that connect to Tolkien's imaginative world. And these are exactly the kind of places which we take people to see on our in-person courses in Oxford. And you hear me go quite deeply into the number of little ferries that are around the city, or were around the city when Tolkien was with us. And also I have a little chat there about how he was a good sportsman, which is not something we tend to think about when we think about the pipe-smoking, professorial Tolkien. So have a listen. The next place I want to go on my lesser-known facts about the Inklings, particularly Tolkien in this case, is about ferries. Now, all of us who have seen the film of Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring, will remember the scene at the Bucklebury Ferry where Merry's punting over and Frodo takes a running jump to join the ferry. That is a bit less dramatically done in the actual book. But what about ferries? Now, these days in Oxford, there is no ferry across the river because we have road bridges and footbridges. But looking at an old OS map, which we picked up in a local charity shop, which was before the big road building boom of the sort of 60s and 70s in this area, it still shows the presence of several little ferries that you could have got on. It's funny to think of that now, because it is an unusual thing these days in the UK to get on a ferry. But in Tolkien's day, you could, for example, walk through university parks, and in order to get over to the other side, in the halfway along the park, there was a little ferry that you could get on. We're talking about a stretch of water which is no more than, 10 metres across or something. It's a very short stretch, but enough and deep enough for a ferry to be necessary. But the one that I think is probably more like the Bucklebury Ferry is the one near the pub I mentioned, the Victoria Arms. If you went out to the fields just beyond Tolkien's house and wanted to cross the Chilwell to get to the pub, the way to do it was to get on the ferry. Near where I live, on the canal in Oxford, there was one near town, a ferry across the river in Jericho. So the whole place was full of these little tiny boats that would take locals across, because building a bridge is expensive. A ferry comes with a shilling fare or a couple of pence or whatever it was, depending on the route. So there we go. I wanted to sort of root the fact that the Bucklebury Ferry might well have had a very Oxford inspiration at the heart of it. Now, two more things for this podcast, and I'll keep on trying to dig up lesser known facts, but these are two more things for this particular episode. One is Tolkien, the Forgotten Sportsman. Now, when you think of Tolkien, I bet most of you have in mind a picture of him as an elderly man, perhaps sitting under a tree, smoking a pipe, or in a library, or in his study. That's the archetypal image we have of Tolkien. But of course, he wrote his novels when he was a much younger man. He certainly wrote The Hobbit in the 30s when he had a young family. So we have to sort of shift our frame and start thinking about him in his prime, really. And he was a very active person. Now, this thought to come up with this was prompted by, I keep saying this, so forgive me if you've heard me say this already. It's prompted by the story of the squash playing in my own family. My husband's grandfather, when he was an academic in Leeds, was Tolkien's squash partner. I had never thought that Tolkien played squash, but there you go. Proof positive in my own family. That was something he certainly tried in the 1920s up in Leeds. But when you actually look through the biographies, you come across Tolkien as a keen rugby player. Now, rugby is a game less known in the States, but certainly played in many countries around the world. It's a very rough game with lots of scrums and a ball shaped a similar way to the American football. So it is a high-impact game. He was very keen on rugby at his oratory school in Birmingham, and he was actually captain of rugby at the next school, King Edward's. Considering that he wasn't the biggest, heftiest guy ever to live, he was a slim-statured man, it probably suggested he was in one of the running roles in that, where you have to sort of dodge past the big defending guys. But anyway, very impressive that he was a rugby player. Also, there are references to the family going punting and playing tennis. When he took over 20 Northmoor Road, there was actually a decrepit tennis court there. I think he got rid of it because he preferred gardening, but he certainly did play tennis. And there's also references to him rowing. Again, another water-bound sport. So he was definitely more of a Merry Brandybuck than a Sam Gamgee when it came to being on the water. It's also known from his biography that he was a terrible driver, but a very successful walker. And in our second excerpt, you can hear me in conversation with Matt Fox. Matt was the curator of an exhibition called The Magic of Middle-earth, which was doing a tour around the UK. So what do you think it's taught you about Tolkien as you've assembled the collection over the years?
That's a good question. I would say that fantasy and science fiction are often sort of lumped together in the bookshops, on that same sort of shelf. But the evocation of nature in fantasy has no parallel across the sci-fi, and few writers really evoke the natural world as well as Tolkien does.
Oh, I'm so pleased you say that, because that's completely my take as well. Brilliant. Carry on.
Yes. Well, I'd actually go so far. Some critics use that as about to hit him and say, that he cares more about describing landscapes than about describing the characters in some places. But he was far-sighted in terms of his environmentalism, and he was particularly passionate about trees. And from his own imagination sprung Treebeard, protector of the forest. And I think people are slowly coming around to his way of thinking, that actually trees may be a really decisive element in averting an environmental catastrophe. And that's something that I sort of wanted to bring across in the exhibition. And the exhibition supports the Woodland Trust as well, I should say. That's something that I think I've kind of got from Tolkien, and perhaps I wouldn't care quite so much about that if I hadn't read Tolkien, and I think that's something, a gift that he's giving us across the years, from a time when it wasn't seen as particularly important, perhaps, but now it's becoming very pressingly important.
So I'm really interested that you're also a collector of other memorabilia. You mentioned 1980s stuff to start with. I expect Stranger Things must be up your alley in that case. It's evocation of the 1980s. What do you notice in the difference between the sort of quality of the things that were produced in the 80s and the Tolkien artifacts that you can buy, like the miniatures and other things? Do you feel there's a difference in approach?
I love the 80s for its kind of, the colours, and, there was this big explosion of being able to put electronics within toys, and of course video games. They kind of made sort of fledgling steps in the 60s and 70s, but they really came into their own in the 80s. As sort of a Tolkien collector, or within the 80s, there's not a huge amount actually. It was a fairly quiet period. At the tail end of the 70s, we had the Ralph Bakshi movie. And there was a small toy line that came out to accompany that. They were sort of scaled the same way Star Wars figures are scaled, but they really didn't do very well. They didn't have great play value. There weren't many accessories, and it was a very small toy line. So they didn't sell well, and that conversely, not selling well means actually they're really quite valuable today. And they're not quite as high as Star Wars figures on the card price, writers, but those figures are still pretty desirable. In particular, there's a ring wraith on a steed, and if you want to find one of those sort of mint, then you're going to have to spend into the thousands to acquire that one.
Yeah. That's amazing. I do remember, this is showing my age now, that in the very early day of home computers, there was a Hobbit game that took absolutely forever to load. And it was very much a very simple click to go left, go right, going through the following in Bilbo's footsteps. But that was the very first computer game I ever played, the adventure style computer game. It's lucky it didn't put us all off, because it really was a lesson in patience, that game.
Yes, previously to that, there had been a few generic role-playing games like Colossal Cave and Adventure that were sort of, within the Middle-earth sphere. But The Hobbit by Melbourne House, ZX Spectrum, that was the very first Middle-earth themed game. It was actually made by a couple of Australians, Veronica Megler, put the game together, and it was the first game really to be a text adventure, but also have graphical tableaus. So you'd actually you'd have the text at the bottom that you're in the Hobbit hole, Bilbo's house, but then above it you'd have this great picture, and the picture would sort of draw before your eyes, because the Spectrum wasn't powerful enough to render it in one image. So you'd get the little green door would be drawn in there, and you'd see a bit of the landscape. And as a child, seeing this for the first time and actually seeing my TV now is interactive. I can actually do things on the TV, rather than just passively watch BBC 1 and 2. It was amazing. So I have very fond memories of The Hobbit.
Yeah, I'm sure there should be a secret club of all of us who spent that summer holiday in in the 80s doing that game. Now, I would certainly be a card-carrying member of that club. So do you have any plans to take your exhibition elsewhere, as you've now got this collection, if people are interested in seeing it?
Yes, indeed. It is. It's a touring exhibition, and it's going to be visiting museums all around the country. So I can't really sort of make the announcements of where and when it's going to be at this time. But watch this space, and it'll be on our Facebook page, The Magic of Middle Earth. But it will indeed be hopefully coming to a part of the country near you. If Basingstoke is just too far away for you.
And what about if we've got people over in America? Would you be temptable to, because a lot of our listeners are over there, would you be temptable to take it abroad?
Well, absolutely. It's not, Middle Earth isn't something that's specifically British, and Middle Earth collecting has got a fantastic global audience. So it could indeed go to America or to any other country across Europe. So that'd be fantastic to do so. Okay,
so we'll put a link in the show notes. So if anyone's listening who wants to tempt Matt to bring his exhibition their way, you'll be able to contact them through their Facebook page. So I have a few kind of more general questions now for you. And the first one I wanted to ask you is, do you have any favourite Tolkien trivia that you would like to share? I mean, you've actually already shared a few bits, but perhaps from the filmmaking process, for example. Mind you, I'm not sure you can beat the Smaug with 4 legs and 2 legs. That's pretty... You knocked it out of the park with that one.
I'll keep my trivia in the 80s, as you know that I particularly enjoyed that decade. And it's the rock group Silmarillion. They had hits in the 80s with a couple of big hits called Kaylee and Lavender. And that group, they were named after Tolkien's book, The Silmarillion. In fact, they originally began life as Silmarillion, but they decided to shorten it to Marillion to avoid legal issues. So yes, that's my nugget of trivia for you.
Yeah, that's right. I'm sure there's actually quite a surprising number of firms named after Tolkien themed things like Palantir and others. I wonder how they negotiated that. Anyway, good luck to them if they are dealing with the Tolkien estate. They're very fierce about guarding the copyright, which is as it should be. Almost every episode we do that mentions the Peter Jackson cast or the Rings of Power get a lot of listens, because I think we're all fascinated by what filmmakers and program makers do with Tolkien's world. But it was also very pleasing to see that the readership, or listenership, I should say, followed us into the audio world, because when I was reviewing Andy Serkis's version of The Lord of the Rings, I also took the opportunity to review all the existing audio versions of Lord of the Rings, including the dramatised one. So have a little listen if you want to find out what it's like to listen to Lord of the Rings rather than watch. Now, let's go back to 1981. I actually remember this being made. It was a huge part of my childhood, that the fact the BBC had done this fantastic version. It was dramatised in 26 episodes. And in those days, of course, it wasn't on demand. You had to wait with your cassette tape recorder to record them if you wanted to listen again. And I have to admit to doing that. The cast was stellar. Some of the names many of you will recognise. So Ian Holm played Frodo in the BBC version, and he returned as Bilbo in the Peter Jackson films. But Gandalf was played by a man who was like a very well-known actor of the time, Michael Hordern. I actually knew him as a child because he was the voice of the Paddington cartoons, but he also was a very notable film actor. Robert Stevens, he is perhaps also known for being once married to Maggie Smith. He played Aragorn. And Bill Nighy played Sam. And there were lots of other very notable people. John Le Mesurier played Bilbo. And those of you who have watched the British comedy programme Dad's Army, he was in that cast. So you can see they really were able to attract into the recording studio a really superior team of voice actors. Now, a really nice thing about the BBC version is that it was directed by two women, Jane Morgan and Penny Lester, and they did a really excellent job in choosing their material, dividing it up. They brought along Stephen Oliver, whose music I think is definitely amongst the best versions of the songs, extremely singable. And they also had little extras at the end of some of the episodes where you could have even more songs if you wanted. Like I remembered there was an extra set from Treebeard at one point in the Two Towers. So they did a really, really excellent job in bringing the poetry of Tolkien into the dramatization. I think that one thing to point out is they took some cuts. Like Peter Jackson did, they didn't include Tom Bombadil. And there was sort of, there is a argument that Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring takes a long time to get going. And the Tom Bombadil material isn't really important later on in the plot. So it's an obvious cut if you want to slim down your offering. They also had really good, simple special effects. So when you listen to it, you do feel if you lay in bed or in the car or wherever you are, you really feel in the world with sort of wind sounds and the idea of particularly the Black Riders. They have a very ghostly tone. There's a very good Smeagol as well. I mean, we've all got so used to Andy Serkis, but actually the person who takes on Smeagol in this version, that's Peter Woodthorpe. He for me, until I saw the Peter Jackson films, he was the Smeagol, the voice of, and he had previously voiced the same character in the Ralph Bakshi animated version. And I believe that the gentleman who played Boromir, Michael Graham Cox, also had appeared in that version too as a voice actor. So there's some lovely crossings over between the various versions. So I would say that it was just such an excellent production, really very high class. For me, the voice that I didn't quite warm to, and this perhaps is just a personal taste, is I found Robert Stevens as Aragorn he felt older, and I happened to sort of already know what Robert Stevens looked like because he'd appeared in some children's dramas at the time. and he had played a bad guy in a version of, I think it was The Box of Delights, the John Masefield story. And I remember feeling he wasn't quite right. So for me, that was one of the weaker sides of that production, but definitely highly recommended, particularly, as I mentioned earlier, for the quality of the songs, which they do really, really well. So moving on, we're heading a bit more into the digital age, but not quite yet. In 1990, an actor called Robert Inglis sat down and recorded an unabridged version of The Lord of the Rings. It was directed by Claudia Howard, and the music is a variety of either music sort of noted by Tolkien, something that Robert Ingalls had, I'm not sure if his name is Inglis or Ingalls. I think I'll go with Ingalls. He'd made up himself, and also Claudia Howard also added some music too. In the production, I think they re-released it at around the same time as the films. It has some very nice musical interludes that signal the end of a book and the beginning of another. They use this same production note in the Martin Shaw version of Silmarillion, and then really well chosen, a sense of almost like the leaving the tide is leaving, and I think it really adds to that version. What do you get when you listen to Robert Ingalls? Well, you get a very professorial tone. It almost, I kind of tell myself it's a bit like sitting listening to Tolkien read it to you, and that is a big plus point. He's very good. He doesn't push too far away from a reading voice. It's not a dramatized reading, but he does find a lot of different notes, and you're never confused by who's speaking. He does an extremely good job, and I think it's very listenable. It's definitely has a quality about it which is very relaxing, and the perfect audiobook in a sense that you can just let it wash through you and wash over you, and you go with the story. I think that perhaps he's less good on how to put this, because it feels a bit like a period piece. I'm almost surprised to find it was recorded in 1990, because he feels like he could have recorded it in 1950. There is an element of it feeling slightly old-fashioned. I think it might be the tone and the feeling of a gentleman of a certain age. So what you're getting, as I'm saying, is it does feel quite appropriate to imagining it being a bit like Tolkien reading to you. So let us move on now to the big new player in the field, and that is Andy Serkis's version. Now, I think it's really interesting finding Andy Serkis having dedicated what must have been a very large part of his life recently. Maybe it was a lockdown project, to recording this. And I think that what you get, of course, is it feels much more familiar to people who have come at Tolkien from the film. So the very first thing to say is when he chooses a character voice, he very often is channeling what you see from the screen, thanks to Peter Jackson. So, for example, the choice to make Pippin Scottish. The Shire is a very small place, and it's quite funny to think that within such a small area, there are such wildly different accents, which is perfectly fine. And I can see that it distinguishes the hobbits from each other. But I'm also thinking of course, Billy Boyd as he does the voice. It's fine, but just to warn you that there is that element of hearing film actors underneath what Andy Serkis is doing. The other thing that the other actor who is very clearly an inspiration for a voice is Boromir. Totally Sean Bean. very good interpretation of Sean Bean. Again, the choice of a northern accent there. So that, I think, will please lots of people. Because they will sort of be clued in, they can imagine almost seeing a version of the film in their imagination happening. The other thing about Andy Serkis's approach is, unlike Robert Ingalls, who, as I said, had more of a reading voice and doesn't push too far into the drama, there is more energy and more performance behind Andy Serkis's version. So in terms of listening experience, there is peaks and troughs. It's actually more, it's more dramatic, and it is a performance as opposed to a reading, if I can draw that distinction. And of course, the big event in the last couple of years to do with Tolkien has been the Amazon Rings of Power series. We did a number of podcasts about that, anticipating it. Also at the end, where we sort of gave a verdict. This extract, though, is from our discussion that we held with some of our followers about the reactions to it in the early days after the first 2 episodes. Have a listen and see if you agree. I think my own views got less favourable as I went on, but at this point I was feeling quite hopeful.
So that's a little sense of where it's following a track. I think the broad brushstrokes are sort of on within the Tolkien world, but there is a lot of, particularly Galadriel, like reimagining her to do a different job, which probably is sending some people, crazy. But that's basically what they're doing. So I'm not going to give a view on whether it's good or bad to do that. I'd like to hear how you felt, and this is where it goes over to you to discuss. What was your feeling about the story? Did you find it fun, or did you find it too slow? Who would like to chip in with an early reaction? Nancy, off you go.
So I do like it. I've watched both episodes twice. I feel like we're in Middle Earth, which was a really important thing. I really like the relationship between Elrond and Durin, and that we're going to get to see Khazad-dûm at its height. I like that development. I really had a problem with Galadriel and the others being offered to go to Valinor. Not only because the way they made it look. So I find those female elves with the veils on really creepy. And I'm like, I don't understand what that is about. And so I was thinking about this last night after watching it for the second episode for the second time, that really Galadriel is the only female elf we get to see her face, basically. And I know she's the star, but it's very weird to me. And I was like, part of the reason why, when we see Galadriel at the mirror with Frodo and she gets all big and bad, and then she comes back to herself and she's like, I passed the test, I can go into the West. The reason that's so impactful is because she had been banned from Valinor and had to protect her little slice of elvendom and was fighting Sauron that entire time with the help of Narya, and so she does pass the test and become forgiven, so by allowing her the opportunity to go back to Valinor, like right at the very beginning, I think it takes away from that. I don't have a problem with her being this warrior. Tolkien did say she was, really strong, and he called her name was like Man Maiden. Mm-hmm. And so I don't really have a problem with that. I was thinking about the whole Celeborn thing too last night, that he could still be there. He could be, because they're not always together, like you said, and he could be off on his own doing the whole, founding Lorien thing or whatever. So I just, so I don't have a problem with them making her like this, but I did kind of have a problem with Gil-galad and him saying that evil was gone. Like he seemed, and Elrond, they both seem like politicians, sort of. And I guess they would be. And I guess even in The Lord of the Rings, Elrond was a bit of a politician. I mean, but to dismiss it so offhand, just because, she said she found clues, but I don't know. That whole thing just seemed weird to me. I love the hobbits, the Harfoots. I love the Harfoots. I love this mystery man who it is who I think it is. And I projected a while back that who it would be, but I'm wondering if they're I don't know if I want to spoil that, but I'm wondering if they're leading us on with that. But I like the way the Harfoots are being portrayed, and they seem very natural. I mean, the elves are the ones that felt most stilted to me, where the humans and the Harfoots seemed very real. I'm not sure about the elf-human relationship right off the bat, and I'm also worried that this thing between Galadriel and Halbrand, they're hinting at something, and I don't think they should go there. But so far I'm happy with the way it looks. I'm happy with most of the characters the way they are, and I mean, I think I heard there's only 8 episodes, and that's a lot to develop in the first season. And what had worried me was, in seeing the previews, there was a whole lot going on very early. Like they really jumped the timeline. Like I know they said am I frozen?
No, keep going.
It said they compressed it, but I think they may be compressing it too much.
So I don't know about the naked man, but I've got a kind of either or.
Oh.
So I was thinking, well, it'd be fun to use that guy as the Hobbit's introducing Sauron. It could be Sauron, who's kind of fallen angel, fallen from the sky, Lucifer figure. But because and also it looks like an eye, they're sort of in the middle of that thing. But then when I actually saw him, I thought, oh, he's definitely channeling a kind of Gandalf the Grey grunge. So maybe he's a wizard, and he starts being a bit scary. And actually, that's a classic thing to do, isn't it? If it actually turns out to be good, you start him a bit scary. Whereas if he was going to be Sauron, you'd start him being really nice.
I do think
and do it the other way. So my money's shifted to being, if I'm in Vegas, I'm going to put him on the Wizard Gandalf chip, I think. I don't know. What do other people think? Because we don't know. I don't know.
Especially.
So Katya, you've got your hand up. What's your view?
Yeah, so I enjoyed it more than I thought I would. I was very apprehensive. They wouldn't be respectful to Tolkien, but they were, in my opinion, more respectful than not. I am totally in love with the couple of the woman healer and the guard elf. And that surprised me because I think they've been totally imagined for the Amazon show, but I liked the chemistry that they had. I liked the individual characters. I think out of all of the elves, the guard for me had the most elvish behavior that I would expect, because I was very disappointed by almost all other elves. Elrond, I was not convinced by the actor. He didn't seem enough elvish to me. But I did like the dwarves, the Harfoots. And generally found it's very visually appealing. Kind of divided on Galadriel. Didn't like her in the first episode. Liked her very much in the second, way more the second episode. But I also tried. It's kind of difficult for me to judge it with a lot of precision because I'm not that familiar with all of the prehistory of the Middle Earth. Way more happy than I thought I would be, and love the elf and human couple. Generally, I'm always a sucker for a difficult love story. So I'm mostly here to follow this couple. It's like my main interest for now.
No, that's really fascinating because they're the couple. When they come on the screen, I think, oh, come on. I'm less interested in them, though I do like his breastplate. I spend a lot of time looking at it thinking, oh, it's a green man.
Yeah, because I think finally the costumes were very nice, but I was a bit disappointed by the armor of the elves. I would expect more of intricate metal work on their armor, and it's very plain to me. But yeah, it's the kind of nitpicking.
Yeah, we can. It's fun to nitpick there. That's what we're here to do. I mean, why not?
And the final excerpt is from a podcast I recorded at the beginning of the year with one of my regular co-presenters, J.R.R. And we were discussing how Tolkien is seen 50 years on from his passing, which of course is the anniversary falls this year. In this extract, we're discussing how it's now perfectly possible to study Tolkien academically, when earlier on, during the first few decades after his passing, it was certainly sniffed at by universities. So, looking at, I think that I'm very pleased to say 50 years on from the moment when Tolkien died, where his work was kind of slightly embarrassing for academia. Now, if you say as a student, I'd like to do a dissertation on Tolkien, they'll say, oh, yes, which aspect do you want to do it on? They won't say, oh, go away. They'll be interested. And there are some fantastic academic books written about Tolkien, papers and so on, including your own, Jacob, that people can read to sort of open that up in an academic sense. What is for you? What academic aspects of Tolkien have you followed? What's been the will-o'-the-wisp that you followed across this particular marsh?
For me, part like mythology, myth building, myth making, right? That Tolkien is engaged with. For me, that's what is fascinating. The development of a cosmology, right? And so part of my academic training is in world mythologies and in different versions of different myths from each of these different cultures, different eras, and different languages. And so there's real affinities that I see with how Tolkien is developing his cosmology, with his cosmogony, right? His birth of the world, putting that into conversation with some of these world myths is, for me, very, very enlightening. Helps to highlight different things that make both Tolkien's stand out and some of these other world myths, appreciate different aspects of them. So he put so much thought, effort, revisions, approach them from different angles that it's a worthy conversation partner to myths that have been around for thousands and thousands of years. So for me, that's part of is kind of putting it into conversation, having Tolkien as a conversation partner with world myths and what he's doing. So that's one of the things that kind of captured me and got me into kind of academic engagement with Tolkien in particular.
Yes, and I think that's one of the wonderful things about the richness of the material is that you can take it into, you can look at it in a linguistic aspect, you can look at its theology, you can look at its world building, you can look at its themes, you can look at its relationship to eco-criticism. I mean, it's so rich. And so the fact that people didn't see that and thought it was just a fantasy story back in the 80s is that's a real improvement. And so 50 years on, we can celebrate that we've matured as judges of Tolkien's work, which is good. So thinking about now, Tolkien is hot property. No one's going to make a fortune out of writing an academic paper on Tolkien. I'm sorry, Jacob, that's not where the money lies.
Yeah. So
Tolkien now has become a property that has value for the world of film and television. So we have previously discussed things like The Rings of Power, the Peter Jackson films, and so on. But should we move a little bit wider than that and see what else owes its existence to there having been Tolkien? Because I think a lot of the big stonking sort of big fantasy series do actually owe their existence to there having been Tolkien to start with. And so I'm looking at you, Wheel of Time, The Witcher, what else is there?
Game of Thrones.
Game of Thrones, thank you. Yeah, House of the Dragon. So I think all of these exist because the Peter Jackson films were a success. If we rerun history and The Fellowship of the Ring was panned, that they did animation that was just no good, like special effects were rubbish. Any of the cast was unwatchable, all the things that could have gone wrong. Peter Jackson turned out to be a terrible director. I think we would not have had this, because I think it's different from the Harry Potter things that come along. I think there's a whole strain of fantasy films of Harry Potter-esque aspect which follow on, all the ones set in schools, like is it The Magicians, that one, which is a high school version, and even something like Wednesday, the new is that Netflix series. These all seem much more like sons and daughters of Harry Potter, whereas the big epic fantasy ones seem to owe their existence to Tolkien. I think that's probably why they're there. But do you think they're right thinking that Tolkien's made a way? Because I haven't seen these things being as successful. Game of Thrones was, because I'd say that was like a kind of bleaker Lord of the Rings. It's like Lord of the Rings with Byzantine politics.
Right.
Or Lord of the Rings run by the Borgias, something like that.
Yes. Yeah. Plus seasonal depression. It's really interesting because I remember having a conversation with somebody pretty soon after Game of Thrones came out, talking about Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones, kind of putting those in conversation with each other, with a student who was just noticing tonally that Game of Thrones was watching it, that seemed like it was kind of a one-time watching for him. He's like, I liked it, enjoyed it, I'm not going to watch it again. Okay. Whereas with the Lord of the Rings film, it was one that for him, it was palatable, that the tone, everything, it was something that bore multiple rewatches. And so I think, there's something about the type of show, that while Game of Thrones tells a particular type of story and a particular type of approach to life, I don't know that people want to be having that on repeat all of the time and just kind of rewatching that and those particular lessons, or like what you learn about humanity, and in particular the negative part of humanity, or that if that's what you want reinforced. I think part of what Tolkien does is, while there is certainly you see people who are corrupted, and you see traitors, and especially in the Silmarillion, right? You see some people that some true tragedies happen, that there is still this kind of like undergirding idea of hope. There's some strand of hope that comes through, that even though you're facing this long decline, right? That the world is actually ending, but yet there's something here that is hopeful, that is pulling through this kind of sweetness intermingled with the sorrow, which goes back to Tolkien's cosmology and the creation of the world itself. So I think that is important and sets it apart from a lot of these other works.
I think it's like the Starglass, the Lady Galadriel's gift to Frodo, that the book feels like that. It's shining bright in the darkness. You can bring it out and make it shine. Funnily enough, today I was doing a school visit about my books to do like an assembly style event. And part of what I do is I create stories with the children, and they have like cards they can select. They can't see what they're selecting, so it's a random selection thing. And then ask them which story they like best. And one of them had a bittersweet ending. That was one of the endings that was selected. And one boy chose that as his favorite story. And I said, why did you like that story? And he said, I like endings that don't feel too happy. There's something in us that it's fine to watch, the wedding bells sort of ending. Yeah. But I think there is a recognition that, we're all going to die. There is an element where it feels closer to a lived experience, even though it's a fantasy world, where there is this sadness within the happiness. But also a sense of redemption about that. Yeah. The idea that sacrifice isn't wasted. Frodo's sacrifice is worth it. Even though it's personally costly. And that is really the most profoundest parts of life. And that's why people rewatch, I'm sure, because it reaffirms some of those hopes that we have for the meaning of our existence. It sounds all very serious, but that is really the value I get from Lord of the Rings, and many other people do. Thank you so much for listening. We love responding to ideas that you come up with. In fact, several of the episodes have been as a result of suggestions from listeners. So if you've got any ideas for what could be in the 4th season, do let us know. And also, if you are keen on any fantasy writers that you would like us to reach out to, also do send us a line, because it's nothing like saying your fans want to hear from you that gets people to agree to come and do a podcast. I hope you all have a wonderful, fantastic summer. We'll be back very soon.
Thanks for listening to Mythmakers podcast, brought to you by the Oxford Centre for Fantasy. Visit oxfordcenterforfantasy.org to join in the fun. Find out about our online courses, in-person stays in Oxford, plus visit our shop for great gifts. Tell a friend and subscribe wherever you find your favourite podcasts worldwide.